begin with WHCI. Good morning, Gerida. Are we ready to begin with WHCI?
We are okay, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
Yeah, she's having problems with her volume, audio.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'd like to call the West Hartford Virtual Community Planning and Economic Development Committee meeting of February 16th to order. For the record, please let it be known that Councilor Zdanowicz and Councilor Winograd and myself, the three committee members, are all present, as well as Mayor Cantor and Councilwoman Adrian Billings-Smith. With respect to members of the Town Council. First item of business is the approval of the minutes. Everyone should have had an opportunity to look over the minutes from December 2021, as well as January 19, 2022. Is there any corrections to the minutes? I do have one correction on the December 2021 minutes. I'm referred to as Deputy Mayor. At that point, I'm just Councilor Davidoff. So if we could make that one correction, that would be make it more accurate. And seeing no other further corrections, do I have a motion to accept the minutes? Thank you, Mrs. Janowitz. Mr. Winograd, thank you. Okay, we're moving right along as we always do here. Item number 2 is the 2021 Complete Streets Annual Report. Mr. Town Manager, we'll kick it off to you, and then you can kick it off to whoever will be reporting on that. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Rick Ledwith, Acting Town Manager. We have uploaded a copy of our 2021 Complete Streets Policy Annual Report onto Civic Clerk. And by way of background, you may recall that we did adopt a Complete Streets policy back in 2015 with the goal of this policy to ensure our roadways complement and enhance the surrounding neighborhood character and accommodate all users, drivers, pedestrians, along with persons with mobility impairments. Each year, we submit an annual report to the council that evaluates progress towards the development of complete streets. And this year's report was prepared by Greg Summer, who is of course, our assistant town engineer. In this year's report, you can see we have incurred a little over $1 million in ongoing construction. Complete streets improvements, over $1 million in complete streets improvements, including an additional 4.44 miles in bike trails, ongoing construction of the Trout Brook Trail, as well as several sidewalk and crosswalk improvements. We've also continued traffic calming projects between Cedric and Boulevard. And the report does conclude with an update on the North Main Street road diet. We do have our team on the call led by our director, Dwayne Martin, and we'd be happy to dive down as deep as the committee wanted into the report itself. Turn it back to you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Manager. So Mr. Martin, I guess I'll ask you to provide some more detail. I don't think we need to go really far into the document. I think all of us have read the details. I think basically the town manager basically highlighted a lot of things that were in the report, but in case he missed something, maybe you can add that to this morning's presentation.
Thank you very much. Good morning. Dwayne Martin, Director of Community Development. I always like to give credit where credit's due. So Greg Summer, I'll turn it over to him, the Assistant Town Engineer, just to go through the highlights of our annual report.
Thank you, Mr. Martin. Mr. Summers.
Good morning. Thank you, Greg Summer, Assistant Town Engineer. Yes, as the Town Manager identified, kind of gave a general overview. I don't want to go too deep into it, but One of the highlights for us anyways was bike lanes and shared bike facilities. This past year, we had the benefit of, it was the second year of our community connectivity grant program, where we received about $100,000 in funding. So we were actually able to add about 2.16 miles of bike routes and an additional just over 4 miles of bike lanes. Those were all part of our resurfacing program. For the most part, we resurfaced the roadway and then went back and installed bike lanes or sharrows to provide bike routes on several of our major arterials. And we did that in conjunction with the Pedestrian Bicycle Commission, obviously. The other piece of the report that we wanted to highlight, as well as this committee is aware, we have launched a traffic calming program, which we'll be coming back to you with to finalize in the coming months here. But that's something that we're starting to incorporate and do a lot more of this year. As far as traffic calming, we incorporated some speed humps on Grove Street, and we also added some semi-diverters, as you're probably aware of, on 4 Mile and also on Newport, to help alleviate some traffic and some crash issues that we've been having over there at the boulevard. So with that, I'll open it up if anyone has any questions. I won't touch too much on the road diet. Obviously, we have that coming in next month as well. But if there's any questions on the Complete Street Annual Report, happy to address those at this time.
Does any member of the committee have, Mr. Winograd?
Thank you, Ben Winograd, Town Council. Thank you, Mr. Davidoff. I'm glad it came up today. The street calming efforts, which are, we've sort of heard about these a lot as they came along. Obviously, the 4 Mile Road area and the speed humps. But I was actually surprised by the Wallbridge work in my neighborhood, and particularly impressed by the number of trees that we put in there. I'm just wondering, we haven't completed the work on the traffic calming process, and I was sort of curious as to how Wallbridge got picked, for sort of an early program, and whether or not, certainly a lot of other streets have been done recently that didn't get as many trees or any trees at all. I know that's been a real desire for lots of places to get those extra trees, and I'm just sort of wondering about the process that we've used to pick one street over another for that effort. I don't remember hearing a lot of complaints out of Wallbridge. I'm sure there have been. It hadn't kind of gotten to our level the way the other places have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Winograd. Mr. Martin.
Thank you. So Wallbridge Road, that section of it from Fern to Farmington, was selected years ago as part of our neighborhood street reconstruction program. And so that's where we're renewing a lot of the infrastructure and doing a more significant construction project than just a repaving. Leading up to that project getting scheduled for construction, the neighborhood reached out to us and complained about speeding, concerns for pedestrian safety. We had a preliminary neighborhood meeting with engineering staff and the police to describe and get an understanding of the concerns. And from there, we did a lot of measurements, observations, and then we ended up having meetings with the neighborhood again after we had some options and alternatives selected. We ended up narrowing the road. We ended up incorporating the trees, as you've mentioned. That was all done in concert with those residents. We gave them options about whether or not they wanted trees planted. That street also has the benefit of a wider area between the curb and the sidewalk, so it was natural to consider putting trees in there, especially since we were narrowing the road approximately a foot or two. So the traffic calming program that we're developing that we'll bring back to you and you'll learn about, there is back and forth, and we give the neighborhood basically a survey where they would provide feedback to us, trees being one of those. And it doesn't have to be a road reconstruction. That was just good timing in that sense. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Martin. Anything further, Mr. Winograd?
No, thank you for that answer. Yeah, I just certainly, as we look at the traffic calming plan, an important part of this is going to be, sort of that outreach to make sure other streets sort of recognize the ability, what can happen Hopefully, the ones that we've done will sort of set that example. But I think just want to make sure everybody has sort of the opportunity to make their pitch for this type of work, because it's obviously lovely. Walbridge, it's fantastic there. Can't wait for those trees to grow. But yeah, it's really a nice looking project, and I didn't realize the street had also been narrowed. So very nice work over there. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Warner. Mr. Zadanos, any questions or comments? No. And I'll just say that it's hard to believe that it's been 7 years since we adopted the Complete Streets policy. And every year the report, I think, gets better and better. A lot of good news here. It definitely shows us being responsive to the needs of the community and balancing the various interests of pedestrians, motorists, and bicyclists, as well as anybody else who may have some other mode of transportation to use our streets and sidewalks. So I think it's a really nice enhancement. I think it's something that we should stress and promote and publicize, that we did spend over $1 million, and these are the improvements that we made in our community. I think these are things to be proud of. I think other communities across the state and across the nation would be well served by the things we're doing right here in West Hartford. So thank you, Mr. Summers, and your team for overseeing this project. And I presume, Mr. Manager, that the acceptance of the report will be on the next town council meeting, whenever that shall occur. So.
Yes, Mr. Chair, if it's not on the March 8th meeting, it'll be the March 22nd meeting.
Okay, super. Thank you very much. We'll move on to the next item, which is the Brownlee area drainage review. And I believe it's an engineering department. So I'll throw it over to you, Mr. Manager, and then you can hand it off.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Rick Ledwith, Acting Town Manager. Next, we do have the discussion on the memo that was drafted by Julie Vieira, our civil engineer, who is also on the call, outlining a flood issue that we have in the Brownlee and King Edward neighborhood area, where we have some flooding that occurs in backyards and into basements. The memo outlines specific issues in the neighborhood, as well as potential solutions. And again, I'll turn things over to our director, Dwayne Martin, to provide further background and maybe some comments from Julie as well. Thank you. Back to you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Manager. Mr. Martin.
Thank you. And again, similarly, I do want to hand it off to Julie, if that's okay, to give credit where credit's due. I just wanted to preempt her overview of this to state that this is not a new issue. This neighborhood has been challenged with drainage flooding issues for many years, and it's just a difficult problem to address. And it's very flat, and the water tends to sit there because of poor draining soils. But we did evaluate and meet with the neighborhoods and came up with some solutions, and that's what I would like Julie to explain. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Martin. Before I go to Ms. Vieira, I just would like to thank her and the team for being responsive to the needs of the residents. I did hear from several of the residents who reside on Brownlee Road. I did have communications with Mr. Hart and I think Mr. Martin with respect to getting out to at least talk to the residents and hear their concerns. It should be no surprise to many that many of these basements have flooded. It's a developed wetland, and some of them have experienced water as high as 4 feet in their backyards. And they're telling the truth. So it's a nightmare from a homeowner's perspective, because water seeks its lowest level when it comes. In those storms that we had in the past year were events that wreaked havoc for these owners, who probably have cleaned out their basements more times than they really want to, and then had to take remediation steps to prevent mold and mildew from creeping into their home. So I did read the memo. I thought it was very well done. It addressed all the issues that have been expressed by the residents, and we'll look forward to your presentation this morning, Ms. Vieira, with respect to the options that we as policymakers can pursue. So without further ado, Ms. Vieira.
Good morning, Julie Vieira, civil engineer. So as you know, we had some flooding events in 2021, and Brownlee neighborhood is one of the neighborhoods that experienced extensive backyard flooding as well as basement flooding. We had met with the neighborhood, and it's pretty much an ongoing issue there due to several factors, including that it's flat. It's the backyards are in a low point. They're at the end of a very large drainage system that discharges into wetlands across the street and private property, which are also a very flat area. From that meeting, I put together this memo which outlined several options that we were going to look at. Option one, which was a do nothing, no cost, no benefit to the neighborhood option. Option two is a little more extensive. Don't have a price tag on that. It includes investigation into private property, wetlands, including into the town of Bloomfield because all the flow drains north into Bloomfield. Option three was to split the flow and have some of it go down into a larger pipe down Simsbury Road, which is state road, an outlet through private property, which would require permission, etc., which came in approximately around $3 million. And then option four, which was an above ground detention system on the southeast corner of the Aiken School property. Further investigation is needed to see if this is actually feasible due to the grades and if we can get enough capacity there to actually get to do some good to hold some flow. So our next steps at this point is to pursue option four and option one. We are planning on setting up a meeting with the town of Bloomfield to discuss the project and see any issues that they may have. And then as well as option four, which is the above ground detention system on Aiken, to see if that's actually a feasible alternative for the study. So with that, I'll open up for any questions.
Yeah, before, I think you meant to say option two, because option one was a do nothing option.
Right, option two and option four.
Okay, just wanted the record to be clear that it was either the do nothing option. I don't, in my opinion, is not an option. Okay, that shows not unresponsiveness to a very serious concern. Mr. Winograd or Mr. Danowitz, any questions or comments? Mr. Danowitz.
Thank you. Appreciate it. I'm just concerned if for that the option with the basin is that the green space that we have and playground for Aiken School, you know, West Hartford is very densely populated and we don't have a lot of green space available. And I just go back to when we built Charter Oak, we actually needed additional space on that property when building that school and knocking it down simultaneously. So just have concerns about that catch basin and that particular option, just given what I said. Thank you.
Yeah, one of the issues is the grades, because the grades are very flat, say even from Aiken to Simsbury. So to have an underground detention system isn't going to be an option because we can never get it to drain by gravity. And so we still need to talk to the Board of Ed and discuss it with them to get their feelings on it. But yeah, I agree also with that.
Thank you, Mr. Winograd.
Yes, just if you could explain the basin again. I'm not. What does that look like? What? Just trying to understand that option. It's an above ground.
Yeah, so it would be an above ground. So it's basically like a bowl that you would see, and it would probably be grass or planted. The intent is not to make it really deep, just for safety concerns. But to have it to be large enough and not too deep, but to have enough capacity to be able to do something to alleviate the amount of flow that the downstream neighborhood is receiving is what we would be looking at.
So I mean, is it so like an artificial lake kind of? I mean, it would be just like it's sort of a landscaping issue. Is that?
It's just excavated, so it's not an actual structure. It's just an excavated hole in the ground that's
okay.
Grassed.
Which would, when it's not wet, be
dry.
Right, but would it be usable, or I guess I'm thinking
Well,
of,
it depends.
I'm sorry.
I guess it would depend on, the slopes and so it'll have a bottom that'll probably be more flat, but then it'll have side slopes.
Okay.
So I guess, if there's no water in it, maybe it could be usable.
Gotcha.
Thank you, Mr. Zanowitz.
Well, currently it's a soccer field, so it would, after that, it would be unusable. Soccer gets played on weekends in that particular place. So once that gets done, it would be unusable for any kind of sports or playground actions.
To you, Ms. Vieira, the size and the scope of a detention basin here would be about how much of that field area? Do you have any idea how much area you would need to construct something that would be proved to be effective?
At this time, I do not know the size or the extent or what I would need. I think our intent when we looked out there was to try to stay away as far as possible away from the fields as we could to keep it more towards the fence line, towards the road. So we're trying for minimal disturbance, but until I've run the numbers, I don't have an idea of how large that would be.
All right, well, thank you. And I'm certain that we could probably work with our planning office to determine what type of screening would be necessary for this type of detention system as well. Because we don't really want it to be an attractive nuisance. We don't really want people going into the detention basin, playing in there and getting injured, especially since we have elementary school children there 5 days a week. So, but I'm certain there's more to come. So, all right, in terms of the timeline, what do we see as the timeline with respect to exploring options 2 and 4 at this point?
I don't know, Dwayne, do you want to touch?
Mr. Martin?
Thank you. Well, we wanted to have this preliminary discussion first, and we haven't even discussed this with the school. We just wanted to make sure that this committee was aware of the approach, and if comfortable, we'll go forward. It would require survey, obviously some preliminary meetings. What we're trying to do is strike a balance. We're trying to address a neighborhood flooding issue and not impact the school. We're not looking to eliminate soccer fields. So we're trying to strike that balance. But we could go forward with this project if the committee feels as though that is the right approach, and report back probably within a few months. Just give another update and hopefully go forward with this throughout the course of this year.
Thank you, Mr. Martin. So we're in the preliminary stage. You need to still do more information. You need to do more gathering of data, responsiveness, cost estimates, what this thing would look like, things of that nature. Okay, so why don't we put this back on the agenda maybe why don't we say after the budget season? I think that makes a lot more sense. Okay, we're going to be really dedicating the next 2 months to budget issues, and I really think that staff time is probably best served addressing that major concern. And then we can, if there's additional time in your day to work on something like this, obviously, find the ability or capacity to do that. And then I think the committee can look at more concrete plans in terms of like some maps, some drawings, what these things look like traditionally, so you get a better understanding. And then have that discussion, I think, with the town of Bloomfield as well, because I think that's the other option, and see if that's even a realistic alternative, and what the time frame is on both of these, and obviously what the costs are, because everything seems to be, has a cost, and we're sensitive to that. So I think that's fair. Does anybody else on the committee have any other comments or direction? Mr. Zanowitz?
Just as the research evaluation goes forward, just if I could ask, talk to the local sports organizations, because being a guy that has kids and has brought sports and had sports over there, and I can only go according to your map, is right in the middle of the soccer field. So it's I know you're trying to avoid it, but there it is. So that may not what it may not look like a year from now or our next report, but if you can just get them involved and make sure that their concerns are addressed as well.
Thank you, Mr. Zanowitz. I do think that we definitely need to reach any of the stakeholders, whether it be the residents or those who use the fields, as well as the students who attend Aiken Elementary. Okay. Thank you, everyone, for thank you for an excellent memo outlining the options. That was quite helpful on an issue that's a concern. And I do think it's important that we do inform the neighborhood as to what we're doing, but at this point, it's probably a little bit premature until we get more data to share with them. We really don't want to stir the pot up, so to speak, until we really know what are viable alternatives. I think that would be responsive and responsible. Thank you very much. Next item is the Albany Avenue Service Directory, and I'll defer to you, Mr. Manager, and I'm certain you'll probably defer to engineering and public works. So after reading the memo, so I'll just first defer to you, Mr.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Rick Ledwith, Acting Town Manager. Also, we have the memo that you're referring to from our Director of Community Development to the Town Manager, providing background on a service driveway located on Albany Avenue. For the addresses 2649 to 2679 Albany Avenue, which involves 12 homes. You may have seen, if you're driving west on Albany Avenue towards Mountain Road, you'll see that access driveway on the left-hand side. This service driveway dates back to the early 70s, where it appears, at least through information that we've read, that it was the intent for the town to accept this service driveway as a street. However, as you can see, no formal action was ever taken. We have our DPW, we have John Phillips, our director, here this morning as well. We have performed snow and ice control on the service driveway for essentially the last 50 some odd years, as well as asphalt patching over time. But as you can see from the pictures in the packet, the driveway is in need of being redone, resurfaced, torn up, and repaved. So, and the cost to do that would be approximately $100,000. But there's some other things that we would need to consider as well. I'll turn things back over to our director, Dwayne Martin, to talk a little bit through what some of those things we would need to accomplish before moving forward.
Thank you, Mr. Ledwith. Mr. Martin.
Thank you. Good morning. I just wanted to give a couple additional things. Rick, you're doing a great job teeing these up for us. Thank you. So, town doesn't go out and look, town staff doesn't go out and look for these issues. They come to us. So there was a resident that lives on this service driveway, if you will, that perennially reaches out to Public Works and then eventually to engineering in this case, asking about the condition of the road and what the plan is for the town. And my initial reaction was, well, this is private, why would the town be involved? So we did research, and then, as Rick explained, there's more to the story, which I'm not exactly sure how this fell apart, but if you read the record and the memo describes it, this was intended to become the town's to maintain. It just simply didn't happen. And so Public Works has done some work out there, which I'll let John explain if needed. But I really wanted to point out the very end of the memo, because there's more to, some strings attached to it. It's not just the roadway. So the typical way that this works is when we're asked to accept a street, the town engineer will do an evaluation and point out, if it is to become the town's to maintain in perpetuity, what could some of the issues be that would come about from that. So just to highlight those real quickly, there is not the typical street right of way width, so that would be a consideration going forward if we're to take ownership of this, if you will. Similarly, the paved surface is only about 20 feet wide, but it is a service driveway, so it's different in that nature. There is a drainage system that there's 2 catch basins in the service driveway, but those have pipes that go through private property, eventually to state land. The cost to maintain that system was not included in the $100,000. That would have to be assessed and understood whether or not it needs any maintenance or replacement. It may, based on its age, but being as though most of it is off the road, it probably is fine, but we have not looked at that. Would there be confusion about the street name? Probably not, but I wanted to identify that. They're all Albany Avenue addresses. but they don't have driveways that go directly out to Albany Avenue. And there is a sidewalk there, which is interesting. I think the intent was to have the sidewalk extend and connect to areas beyond these properties, but it doesn't, and it does not seem like that is going to be an option, at least in the near future. The sidewalk is in fair condition. My conversation with a couple of property owners when I was visiting the street was that the sidewalk really isn't used a lot, and they would not be upset if it were to be eliminated because of the snow and ice maintenance that would be required and be eliminated if that were the case. And then street lighting. So there is street lighting on Albany Avenue, of course, but nothing on this service driveway. Whether or not that is needed is questionable, but I did point that out in the memo. And then, as Rick mentioned, John Phillips, Director of Public Works, is here should you have any questions regarding what the town has been doing to maintain this service driveway. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Martin. Mr. Phillips.
Good morning, John Phillips, Director of Public Works. Yeah, this area, we call it the runway. For the best of my knowledge and my history with Public Works, we've always treated it with the same level of service as any other street, accepted road in town. Pothole patching, we replaced a catch basin that failed on it a number of years ago, and we always provided snow and ice control.
Thank you, Mr. Phillips. I shouldn't be surprised of your brevity and your thoroughness in your presentation. So thank you very much. Is there any questions on Mr. Winograd?
Thank you, Mr. Davidoff. Two, I suppose there's no way we can push this off on the state. Like they own Albany Ave. I mean, they don't own this piece. It's outside the range of the state's control, I assume.
Mr. Martin?
Thank you. I would be surprised. A little history on how this came to be. When this subdivision was being considered or applied for through the town, it was at the same time that the state was widening Albany Avenue, and that's how this came to be. They did not want the 12 driveways in close proximity to one another intersecting with Albany Avenue for safety reasons, and so they pushed back and would not allow that to happen, and that's when the service driveway came to be. I would be very surprised. I have never had that conversation with the DOT, but I would be very surprised if that's the case. It is not contained within their right of way. And again, I don't know if John Phillips has had that conversation with the state, but that's my understanding of it. Thank you.
No, thank you, Mr. Martin. Mr. Zanowitz.
Actually, I had the exact same question, and you kind of took the answer. And part of my question was that, given that the state has required that particular runway, if you will, they would, essentially making us do that. If we were proposed to go back to 12 driveways so that we didn't have to maintain it anymore, maybe the state would then have some skin in the game. Sometimes it's how you mold the question and whether they do that or not. If we had the option of going back to 12 driveways because that's what we want to do, maybe there is some skin in the game. And then my next question is, as Mr. Phillips talked about, there's been no question in the past of repairs and plowing and salt. How come now? So why? I know there's some more money, but over the 50 plus years, all that plowing, salt, catch basin, that's all cost money, and we haven't questioned it. So why now?
Thank you, Mr. Zdanowitz. I don't know who wants to answer that question.
I can start. John Phillips, Director of Public Works. I'll start. The why now is kind of Dwayne touched on a little bit. The road has reached its life expectancy. The deterioration is and the calls for service for patching and stuff has certainly increased. And as Dwayne Martin indicated, when we looked at it from if we passed it up to engineering and community planning for possible repaving, that's when the discovery was it's really not owned by us. In any, it's not an accepted road. Public Works are just going off the notion that it looked like a public street, acted like a public street, and so we treated it like a public street historically. Public Works that necessarily didn't have the line of sight of that detail that it was never an accepted street back in the early 70s.
Thank you, Mr. Phillips. Anything further, Mrs. Danowitz? Mr. Wintergrund?
Yeah, thank you. Just one other question. If we were to take it as a public street, is it designed as a safe street? I mean, one thing I would imagine we don't have stop signs there, I don't think, which I assume we would. The way the intersection works isn't, is it up to basically our code? And would we sort of be facing liability if we didn't bring it up to sort of our normal standards about what an intersection looks like?
Mr. Martin?
That's a very good question, and I did take a look at it. That's kind of why I had the streetlights on there. I do share a little concern in that, so there's two basic access points to Albany Avenue, an east and a west. If you look at the easterly one, it is not ideal to turn left out of because of the sight line. There's a hill on Albany Avenue, and so we may need to consider prohibiting a left turn out of there. I contemplated, even if it were to become the town's to maintain should be one way, sets up a little bit of complications with regards to mail delivery and other deliveries. But that's certainly something that would have to be reviewed. I don't think it's something that we couldn't get through. There is a way to manage that. I don't think that there's a high crash issue there. There certainly isn't a lot of traffic that goes in and out of these properties compared to Albany Avenue, but we would have to take a little bit of a closer look. I don't believe that there are stop signs there. That would be something that we would have to evaluate. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Martin. I think with respect to Mrs. Zanowitz's concern about driveways going, although be extended to Albany Avenue, that would require a state traffic commission review, and I doubt that would ever get approved, that you would have 12 driveways in such close proximity on a state highway. So I do think this is safe, and I do have some suggestions if we need to come up with road names for this thing. I never heard it referred to as the runway, but that's an interesting consideration. So I guess there'll be more to come. I guess the staff will continue to get back to us, and I anticipate we just talk about this at the meeting after the budget with respect to that. I think that's fair enough. Moving on to the next item, communications. We don't have any being received by the committee. So staff reports, and I'll turn it to Mr. Ledwith, and he can let us know who will be presenting this morning any types of staff reports.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Rick Ledwith, Acting Town Manager. I will turn things over to our Director, Dwayne Martin, who will initiate the conversation on this month's report.
Thank you, Mr. Ledwith. Mr. Martin.
So just to give you a quick agenda for me for this report, I'm going to go over a couple projects that we have ongoing in the engineering division. And then I'll highlight a couple new things that popped up recently, and I'll turn it over to the building official to go over his building division matters. Todd Dumais is present in the meeting but does not plan to speak. I just wanted to mention that in case you have questions for the planning division. So the first project I wanted to discuss is the North Main Street Road Diet, which was mentioned earlier. We plan on coming back to this committee on March 23rd with our consultant to give a presentation and answer any questions that you may have. They are planning on submitting a final draft report to the engineering division soon. We're hoping to receive that at some point, possibly even in the beginning of March. From there, we plan on holding a public information meeting on April 29th. And then that will be followed with a full presentation to the entire town council on either May 10th or May 24th. And just keep in mind that the report will have recommendations to the town as to what they believe should be done based upon the measures of success and failure with what was included in the study. So much more to come about the North Main Street Road Diet. Any questions with that item? No. Okay. Second thing is Fern Street Bridge. So this is the bridge that's near Fern Ridge Park. This project is, this bridge is planned to be completely replaced. So we've hired a consultant and we received grant funding up to $3 million to replace this bridge. It's currently in final design. I'm hoping to be in construction starting this summer. What is left to be done besides putting it out to bid is securing easements from a few private property owners near the bridge. and then also get an Army Corps permit, which has been a little struggle to get a response from them. So once those items are completed, we will be able to go out to bid and then start construction, like I said, hopefully in the summer. However, in the meantime, I was contacted by the DOT, who did an inspection of the bridge last year. And from that, they have expressed concerns about the structural integrity of the bridge. So from their inspection, they did a load calculation. As you may be aware, the bridge is already load restricted. They want to restrict it further. They have concerns about its load bearing capacity. So we've met with the DOT, and I plan on meeting with our consultant today to go over options. But what the state has conveyed to us is that they are requiring us to reduce the load rating. So if it's left as a two-way travel over the bridge, that actually requires a load restriction to be pretty low. And what they're telling us is for a single unit vehicle like an ambulance or a box truck, you'd have to limit it to about 9 tons. And then for a tractor trailer, you could go up to 15 tons. Those may seem like a lot, but they're not. You wouldn't even be able to get fire trucks over it at that amount. So it's a concern. What they've come up with as an alternative, which what we are exploring, is doing alternating flow of traffic across the bridge. So the sidewalks would remain open on both sides of the bridge. No issue with going to and from Fern Ridge Park, but it would be disruptive. And the bridge project had a similar setup to manage traffic through construction with the use of a temporary traffic signal. But we don't have those lying around, and it may be a little bit to procure. So what we're looking at doing is setting up concrete barriers across the bridge and then putting stop signs up until we can secure a temporary traffic signal. My hope is to have the temporary traffic signal in place before the park gets really busy with summer activities. But I wanted to bring this to your attention because the barriers and stop signs may go up pretty quickly. Already mentioned this concern to emergency responders, school transportation. It is okay to have the larger vehicles go over, like John Phillips asked about plow trucks. The bridge is not going to collapse, but it is weakened, and we need to react to this. And unfortunately, the timing doesn't work well with our construction. We're just not there yet. And so in consultation with the DOT, we can't wait until the construction starts. Our consultant was aware that the bridge was in a weakened state, and they've set up the construction staging for the bridge replacement to shut down the weaker side of the bridge, which is the side closer to Fern Ridge Park, with the barriers as part of their first stage. So unfortunately, we're reacting to this and trying to get this set up. I wanted to mention it because the barriers could go up pretty quickly, maybe within the next couple of weeks. Any questions with this matter? Okay. Moving on, a couple other things to mention quickly. And I'll also ask John Phillips, Director of Public Works, to assist on this one. So as you know, we've mentioned we're interested in doing Trapper Trail Phase 6. And that is at the DOT being reviewed, and we're waiting to get a commitment to fund to go out to bid and start the construction this year. Similar to the section that's under construction right now, there are trees to contend with. And just to point out, Phase 6 is from Fern Street to Duffield Drive. That's the section of Phase 6. So it's an extension of what is being constructed right now, which is Farmington to Fern. So in consultation with Public Works, there are trees to contend with. So what I mean by that is when we received an inland wetlands permit to carve out a trail that partially goes through the woods, we need to eliminate trees, unfortunately. And we plan to replace trees for the trees that are alive that we need to take down for the trail alignment. In addition to that, there are dead or dying trees that would pose a hazard for the contractors building the trail, for the public that would eventually use the trail, and even the public that is driving or riding on Trapper Drive. And so we've met and discussed with Public Works about handling these trees and getting them down before the construction of the trail starts. But unfortunately, there's a lot of them. And that's why I wanted to bring this up, because it's in a sensitive area of town where there have been tree removal in the past by the DEP for their flood control project. And so this could also happen pretty quickly. We haven't scheduled the work yet. We need to get a better understanding of the cost and go forward. And again, John Phillips, Director of Public Works, the tree warden, is much more in tune with the tree issue that we're looking at here. Thank you.
Mr. Martin, I do have a question. Okay, so I understand it's from Fern Street to Duffield. So there's two sides to this brook, and I just need clarification. The side that we're talking about, the removal of the trees that are in serious condition of removal, is that the side that's closest to the street or the closest to the neighborhood? My understanding, it's the trees that are closest to Trout Brook Drive. Is that correct?
Yes, so this would be between Trout Brook Drive and Trout Brook, the watercourse.
Thank you. So this is not the area that is where they, during the last dredging, where they planted new growth and totally deforest that entire area before. We're talking the other side. Now, with respect to where the trail is going to be, the trail is going to be along that side where it's closest to Trout Brook Drive, or is the trail going to be on the other side, closest to Linwood neighborhood?
Again, the trail would be between Trout Brook Drive and Trout Brook, the watercourse.
Thank you. That's very helpful for the clarification. Thank you. Mr. Winograd.
Thank you. And we did have some heads up on this at Public Works discussion as well. Have we started efforts to sort of alert neighbors about it? That was obviously one of the problems the last time around, was that people woke up to see trees gone as opposed to knowing it was coming. And I assume also the tree warden, when we're taking down dead trees, that we mark them and give. Do we follow those rules about notifying people of objections? Thank you.
Mr. Martin.
Thank you. I'll answer the first part, and then John will discuss how to handle it as the tree warden. We did draft a letter, and we do plan on mailing it out to the neighborhood well in advance of any trees coming down. The next step would be for us to survey the area to identify the trail alignment. And then from there, the contractor will have an understanding of what trees we are talking about that need to come down. And then we'll get quotes from them. And then, of course, before anything happens, we'll send the letters out. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Phillips.
John Phillips, Director of Public Works. To answer your question, Ben, is certainly all the deadwood trees, there's no requirement to post them. I mean, that's routine maintenance. And obviously what started this concern is the amount of deadwood or trees that are would be considered hazardous now because the trail is going in. We've always looked at this area as a tree maintenance issue because of Trout Brook Drive and the target being the traffic that passes by. But because the area east of Trout or west of Trout Brook was essentially a passive area, no pedestrians, letting a tree lean westerly would always be fine and not a concern for Trout Brook. But now that you're going to have a critical target of traffic and then a critical target of pedestrians, parallel to this one tree belt, we feel it's necessary and prudent to go through, take out the dead wood, take out the invasive wood that doesn't grow properly and could become hazardous. Things like your cottonwoods and ash trees are certainly affected by the elm ash borer. Those trees all have a death sentence. If they're not dead now, they will be dying fairly quickly. And just comb through the area to make it safe, and then work with local. We're actually working with a tree planting volunteer group that would look at putting back in native trees, planting them, and refurbish that whole tree belt or that tree area for something more beneficial.
Thank you, Mr. Phillips. Anything further, Mr. Winograd? No. Mr. Zanowitz?
I can have an alibi. As I was sitting here thinking about the Fern Bridge, what's the time frame to actually the replacement of the bridge? And if it's off in the distance quite a bit, has there any consideration been for any box cribbing to support it, or even steel reinforcement to help with that? or is this the blocks and stop signs enough to mitigate it for a long term? But just looking for a longer term solution than a short term.
Thank you, Mr. Zanowitz. Mr. Martin?
So that's a very good question, and that did come up during the DOT meeting as far as an alternative solution. I will discuss that with our structural engineer, the consultant that we have for that project, later today. The challenge with that is the obstruction of the water course. There's not a lot of area or volume that can flow underneath that bridge. It sits pretty low with respect to the water course. And we do have trees and things that get hung up underneath the bridge just because of the way the underside of it is designed. The new bridge won't have that. It'll have a nice smooth bottom. But I will talk to them about that as a consideration to see if that's a viable alternative to keep the bridge open to two-way traffic. As far as the schedule goes, again, it may be optimistic because we don't have any control over the Army Corps permit response, but I'm hoping to start construction in the summer. And in doing so, it will have that alternating flow restricting motor vehicle travel on that park side of the bridge.
Mr. Zanowitz? Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Martin. Anything further in your report with respect to really good news?
I want to just turn it over to Tim McClochie, our building official, just to give a quick update on his division. There were some graphics that you may have seen in my report to the town manager. Our plan going forward is to continue that just for interest. I know there were some questions in the past, and then expanding upon it. So I'll have Tim McClochie explain those metrics. Thank you.
Thank you, Dwayne. Tim McClochie, building official, supervisor of inspection. Building division activity highlights. I'd like to first start with the addition to our team of Dan Luce back in November, and adding Dan to the team, pulling him from retirement and working part-times helped out tremendously. Although we didn't initially gain hours with Dan, he was working 25 to 30 hours. It allowed us to backfill the part-time position, and we found a candidate, Rob Tavella, who started on January 8th. That's been very helpful in streamlining and working with the team. I'd like to highlight my team's efforts also, the staff of Debbie Delke, Lynn Rossi, Jen Asadow working remotely, handling all the phone calls, and Mary Gobuena. We've been able to cut our permit time, which is about the numbers. It's entering permits now. We're currently entering permits that were received on Friday. So we were 3 to 4 weeks out on entering permit applications into the system via office or our service window or through the mail. And we were able to cut that down to about a week. We're reviewing applications dropped off February 8th, which again is down from a couple weeks. We're down to about a week. So the whole process for turnaround time for a permit application from submission to approval is about a week, maybe a little over a week. However, that's a worst case scenario. There are permits that we do receive and issue in the same day, and those typically aren't the ones that are the issue. So I always use the worst case scenario. That the inspections also have improved. We're 5 to 7 days out, depending on the type of inspection that's being requested, because we use concentrations for inspections for specifics. And we also instituted using a special one day a week project inspector for our larger jobs. So we send a plumbing inspector, an electrical inspector, and a building inspector at different times to 27 Park Road, 540 New Park, 13 Berkshire. And we do have an inspector that is working with the MDC sump pump program with a representative from MDC every Wednesday. That happens to be me. So every Wednesday I go with MDC, and we look at MDC sump pump program permit applications to help those get going. So things are working and moving forward. We're still also working on moving CityView online for online permitting and inspections. And we're in the review process, and it is taking a little longer than I expected. But what I really want to do is limit the amount of growing pains that we have for users of the online permitting system. So right now we're in testing, and we've actually had some contractors work with the system to see what we can improve to make it a little more streamlined and a little easier to use. So things are moving forward. Things are still busy, and if anybody has any questions, I'm open to
them. Thank you for your report. The key word was streamline. I like to hear that because I would say lately I have not heard from a lot of residents saying, why is the backlog several weeks? We're usually one of the first people that get a call. Can't you do something? No, we can't. You got to just go through the process. So that's really good to hear that your things that came in Friday are already being inputted. Inspections are about a week and a half, and you have a team devoted to our larger project, and you're taking on the sub pump project. So that's really great news. I think it shows another instance of us being responsive to the needs of our residents. It's also, I think, reflects a good problem to have, that people are willing to make reinvestment in their properties, whether they be residential or commercial. And I think that speaks volumes. And I think I've said on many occasions in the past, it's so important that we do have this plan review, because in the long run, it saves us problems with respect to whether it be building issues or fire issues or any other plumbing issues, electrical, those problems are far worse if they're not addressed upfront. So thank you. Thank you for the efforts of your team. I have no further questions. I don't know if my colleagues do. They do not. They indicated. So thank you very much, and please express my appreciation to the rest of the members of your team.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, Mr. Martin.
That concludes my report. Thank you.
Well, thank you. That was very informative. I thought the meeting went pretty well for the items there. Does any member of the committee have any future agenda items that they would like to see or discuss? If not, we can always reach out to the manager to get those put on there. So without further ado, I'd like to thank everyone for attending this morning and for the comprehensiveness of the reports. It's greatly appreciated. Stay safe and be well.
Thanks, everyone.